We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Detective Comics issue 140. Now this issue originally came out in October of 1948, but I have the 2023 facsimile issue and it has several stories in it. The first one is The Riddler, and this is obviously the first appearance of Edward Nygma, and we learned that in high school there was a puzzle challenge that Edward cheated on, and he found a love of puzzles because of that. So riddles and puzzles and tricks became his kind of mainstay, but he was rigging puzzles to his advantage, being deceptive or cheating in various ways, and that carried over into adulthood when he randomly decided to start becoming a criminal, and he put on a costume and became the Riddler. And his first scheme was to create a giant crossword puzzle for Batman and Robin by manipulating this billboard that would give puzzles to the public. So he tricks Batman and Robin and distracts them while he robs a bank, and he does a similar stunt with this time with a giant puzzle, but Batman figures it out and finds a captive held in a giant puzzle that you see on the cover, and this man is slowly strangling to death, and Batman has to figure out how to end the puzzle before the guy dies. Riddler's third one is a glass puzzle that he traps Batman and Robin in, but things backfire on the Riddler, and it looks like the Riddler may have been killed, but probably not. And it's another one of those like cliffhanger endings that they don't really tell you what happened to the guy, because they could bring him back if he's popular then. And that story was by Bill Finger with Dick Sprague and Charles Paris. Next up we have Robot Man's Double Trouble, starring Robot Man, by Otto Binder and Jimmy Thompson. And this one finds Robot Man being confused for somebody else who looks suspiciously like him, but they are not in fact looking for Paul Dennis, they are looking for Henry Carter. So Robot Man has to try and find the man, and then when he does, it turns out the people looking for him are gangsters who are trying to rob him, and he had thrown some money into the river to try and hide it from these guys to avoid getting robbed because he works at a bank. Robot Man tries to find the money but can't, so he decides to help this guy out by going to a complex and becoming a one-man house builder and building a bunch of houses overnight to try and raise the $10,000 the guy needs. Well, $10,000 was a lot more money back then, and we get to see Robot Man do exciting things like construction and mixing plaster and plumbing. Now, it's not quite as boring as it sounds, and Robot Man does defeat the bad guys and recover the money anyway, but there's some really cool coloring techniques in this one where they do a sunset and there's multiple color shades there. It looks really neat. This issue does have better color than a lot of the other ones. I don't know if they color corrected it or if they were able to find a higher quality issue to scan and present to us, but the colors are really popping this one. Next up we've got Slam Bradley in Dog for a Day, which is art by Howard Sherman. Some gangsters have figured out how to train dogs to locate jewelry, and then they're selling the dogs to rich people with really goofy names like Got Rocks, get it? And then they break in the house the next day, steal the jewels, and then pose as dog catchers to recover the dogs. Well, Shorty Morgan, Slam's sidekick, dresses up like an animal and becomes a talking dog because nobody figures out it's a short guy in a dog costume, and things get wacky and Slam has to stop bad guys. That one was really silly. Probably the worst story in the book, but the art's okay. There's a text article called To the Moon and Back about going to the moon. Remember, this was 1948, so they hadn't really done that yet. They talk about the science behind going to the moon and the complications therein. It's very simplistic and it's a little two-pager. It's not particularly interesting, but from a historical standpoint it probably is. Then we have The Boy Commandos in a story called The Dictator from Alcatraz, which has art by Kurt Swan and Steve Brody. And in here we find a guy named Jumbo. Jumbo Miller is a gangster who escapes from Alcatraz and goes to a small country of Bodelia where he decides to take over. So his thugs pay off a bunch of bandits and get them to work together to use tanks and an aircraft to take over this small country. And they start with a town and then roll through the capital. Jumbo becomes a dictator. So Rip Carter and the Boy Commandos drop in to thwart these shenanigans, and they have to build these silly little planes that look like the Wright brothers made them out of parts left over from a factory. It gets really ludicrous fast, and the boy commandos of course get caught, and Rip has to save them. The boy commandos are rather weird looking. They all have these sort of stereotypical looks to them. One of them's from Brooklyn and talks in this pseudo Brooklyn accent, and one has sort of a Western appearance. This story has a lot of stereotypes in it. Bad guys wearing sombreros, that sort of thing. So Rip and his friends have to liberate this small country in Central or South America and capture Jumbo. It's an okay story. The Batman story was easily the best one. It had the best art and was an interesting look at the first appearance of Riddler. I have to say the detailing is definitely much more in depth in this story than some of the previous facsimiles, so you can see the evolution of the comic books as they go through the Golden Age. And there's some nice angles in here. It's not just flat and boring. There's some awesome perspective shots. So the art is really, really good. The Riddler looks a little creepy and weird at times, and some of the puzzles are a bit silly, but this was aimed at elementary and middle schoolers. The Robot Man story had pretty solid art, even if the story is kind of silly and weird. Like, Robot Man uses his talents to raise $10,000 by building houses. While I applaud his work ethic, it seems he probably could have come up with the money easier in a different way. But the story was okay. The Slam Bradley one had some decent art, but the story is absolutely ludicrous. I think even elementary school kids probably would have had a problem grasping that nobody figured out this was a guy in a dog costume. And the Boy Commandos one, I didn't care for that story either, but the art was really good in that one. It's some good Kurt Swan art, and there's some really cool action scenes in that one. So I will recommend this book. It had some really fun stuff in it, especially for younger readers. So if you know someone that wants to read some Batman stuff from early on in Batman's career, or stuff that's a little bit more age appropriate, this might be in that wheelhouse. There are some pretty hyper violent scenes, but this was aimed at boys in the 40s, so there was much more acceptable levels of violence, especially in entertainment. And there's a lot of action and peril in here, so I think that really would appeal to young boys who have strong imaginations. There is quite a lot of suspension of disbelief that has to go into this, and I think that it will appeal more toward younger readers than adults, because adults tend to be a little bit more like, that's impossible, physics, blah blah blah, etc. And while I don't particularly love the cover, the image is fine. It's just that the lack of any detailing in the background really annoys me. The yellow would have been attention getting, and while the puzzle is cool, it doesn't happen to Batman and Robin, it happens to someone else. It's a good story for the Riddler with a couple of backup stories, and I do like reading these facsimiles, and while this one is only $5 compared to the others that were $7, I think historically speaking, this is good for hardcore comic collectors, because you get to read the Slam Bradley and Boy Commandos stories that are almost never reprinted with the other one. And I didn't even know about the Robot Man story being in here when I first bought it. It's pretty short compared to the others, but the Boy Commandos had some really cool artwork, even though some of the boys look a little freaky weird. I thought that art really makes the Golden Age look a lot cooler, because there was a lot more detailing than I would have expected from this era. So if you get a chance to check this out, I highly recommend it. So that's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.